Grandpa. Whatever you do, do not wear your brown cowboy hat today. My grandson Toby's voice was shaking so hard I could barely hear him over the static. I looked at the hat sitting on the antler rack. That hat had been my crown for 40 years, building the West Ranch empire. I asked him why. He whispered, "Please just trust me and take the gardener's truck." 3 hours later, standing in the shadows of the feed store, invisible to the world, I watched my own son sign my death warrant. Before I tell you how I came back from the dead to destroy the ungrateful snakes I raised, tell me in the comments if you have ever trusted the wrong person in your family. Hit like and subscribe to support this channel. Here is my story. My name is Clinton West, but everyone in Montana just calls me Clint. At 72, I still wake up before the sun. The floorboards of my 5,000-square-foot ranch house creaked under my boots. It was a silence that used to feel peaceful, but lately it felt heavy, suffocating. I walked to the kitchen, passing the portraits of my late wife Martha. God, I missed her. She would have known how to handle Brent. My son Brent. 45 years old, and he still looked at me like I was a walking ATM. And his wife Mallory, a former beauty queen with eyes that calculated the price of everything she looked at, including me. I poured my black coffee. It was 5:45 a.m. I was heading out to check the north fence line. My hand reached for my brown Stetson hat. It was stained with sweat and dust shaped by decades of hard work. That hat was me. Then the phone buzzed. Not the landline. The burner phone Toby gave me last Christmas for emergencies. "Toby," I answered. "It is not even 6 yet." "Grandpa," he was whispering, "listen to me. Do not go out the front door. Do not wear your brown hat. And for the love of God, do not take your red pickup truck." "Boy, have you lost your mind," I chuckled, but my gut tightened. Toby was a good kid, studying engineering at State. He did not play pranks. "I am serious," Toby hissed. "I heard them, Grandpa. Mom and Dad, last night. They did something to the truck. Please, take Diego's old Ford. Wear a baseball cap. Make sure nobody sees your face. Just trust me." The line went dead. I stood there, my hand hovering over my brown hat. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked out the window at my red Chevy Silverado parked in the driveway. It shined under the floodlights. It looked normal. But Toby's fear was real. I put the brown hat back on the rack. I grabbed a dirty canvas jacket from the mudroom and a grease-stained baseball cap I used for painting. I slipped out the back door into the biting cold air. I walked past my truck and climbed into Diego's rusted blue Ford. The engine coughed before roaring to life. I drove away, leaving my identity behind. I drove into town, parking behind the grain silos. I pulled the cap low over my eyes. I looked like any other broke ranch hand looking for day labor. I walked into the feed store. The smell of sawdust and molasses hit me, and then I saw them. Brent and Mallory. They were standing by the counter not 10 feet away. Usually, if I walked in, heads would turn. "Morning, Mr. West," they would say. But today, nobody looked twice at the old man in the dirty jacket. I turned my back to them, pretending to inspect a bag of fertilizer. "He should be crossing the pass by now," Mallory said. Her voice was sharp, impatient. "Are you sure the brake line was cut enough?" Brent asked. His voice trembled. "My own son, stop whining," Mallory snapped. "I paid the mechanic double. Plus there is a logging truck waiting at the blind curve just in case. Once he goes over, the autopsy will just show a confused old man who lost control. We get the $5 million life insurance by Friday, Brent, and the ranch is finally ours to sell." I froze. My knuckles turned white, gripping the fertilizer bag. I stopped breathing. They were not just waiting for me to die. They were actively hunting me. My son. The boy I taught to fish. The boy I bailed out of debt a dozen times. He was standing there checking his watch, waiting for his father to die. I do not remember leaving the store. I just remember the rage burning a hole in my stomach. I had to know. I had to see it. I drove Diego's truck up the old logging road that overlooked the dead man's curve. It was a high ridge hidden by pines. I pulled out a pair of binoculars. Below me, the highway wound around the cliffside like a gray snake. And there it was, my red Chevy. I had asked Diego to drive it to the mechanic in the next town over, but I told him to take the long, flat route. Why was it here? Then I saw the driver. It was not Diego. It was a mannequin. Toby. That brilliant kid. He must have rigged it up, or maybe Diego jumped out earlier. Then the horror happened. A massive logging truck swerved into the wrong lane. It slammed into the side of my red Chevy. Metal screeched. Glass shattered. My truck spun, hit the guardrail, and flipped over the edge. It tumbled down the canyon 300 feet before exploding into a ball of orange fire. I lowered the binoculars. If I had worn my brown hat today, if I had been stubborn, I would be burning in that wreck. Clinton West was dead. At least that is what they thought. I sat on that ridge for an hour. Tears ran down my face, cutting through the grime on my cheeks. Not tears of fear, tears of mourning. I was mourning the death of the love I had for my son. That love died in the fire down below. My phone buzzed again. It was Toby. "Grandpa, I saw the smoke. Tell me you are okay." "I am here, son," I said, my voice sounding like gravel. "I am alive." "What do we do now?" Toby asked. I looked down at the smoke rising from the canyon. I took off the baseball cap and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked old. I looked tired. But my eyes were cold, hard as flint. Now I said, "We let them celebrate. We let them think they won. You go home, Toby. Play the grieving grandson. Cry your eyes out. Make them believe it." "But Grandpa, where will you go?" "I am going underground," I told him. "They wanted to bury me, so I will become a ghost. And when I come back, I am going to bring hell with me." I pulled Diego's rusted Ford into the gravel lot of Miller's General Store, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I was not shaking from the cold Montana morning, but from the adrenaline coursing through my 72-year-old veins. I pulled the brim of the grease-stained baseball cap lower over my eyes and caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror. I did not see Clinton West, the cattle baron who owned half the valley. I saw a ghost. I saw a nobody in a torn canvas jacket that smelled of old motor oil. I took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy glass door. The little bell above the door chimed a sound I had heard 1,000 times. Usually old man Miller would look up and shout, "Morning, Clint, how is the herd?" Today he did not even look up from his newspaper. I walked toward the back aisle, keeping my head down, shuffling my boots, like a man whose spirit had been broken by years of hard labor. That is when the air left my lungs. Standing by the coffee station, not 5 feet away, were the two people I had spent my life protecting. Mallory looked entirely out of place in her cashmere coat and Italian leather boots, the heels clicking impatiently against the linoleum floor. She was checking her manicure, looking bored. Next to her was my son Brent. He looked pale, his eyes darting around the store like a trapped animal. He was sweating despite the freezing temperature outside. I moved closer. I had to know. I had to be sure. I grabbed a can of axle grease from the shelf my shoulder, intentionally brushing against Brent's expensive puffer jacket. "Excuse me," I grunted, changing my voice to a low rasp. Brent flinched violently and stepped back, muttering a quick apology without making eye contact. He looked right through me. To him, I was just a dirty old ranch hand, a piece of background scenery that did not matter. Mallory did not even flinch. She just wrinkled her nose as if a bag of trash had been left too close to her designer purse. She stepped away from me, wiping her sleeve as if my poverty might be contagious. Then Mallory's phone rang. The sound cut through the quiet store like a gunshot. She answered it on the first ring, her voice dropping to a low, icy whisper that I could hear with crystal clarity. "Yes, I am here," she said. I froze my back to them, pretending to read the warning label on the grease can. "Listen to me," she hissed. "The old man will be crossing the Devil's Pass at 9 sharp. Do not mess this up. Make it look like a mechanical failure. I do not want the insurance investigators sniffing around for foul play. We need that $5 million payout by Friday." I gripped the metal can so hard it dented under my fingers. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at Brent's reflection in the glass of the refrigerator door. He heard every word. He knew his wife was ordering the execution of his own father. I waited for him to snatch the phone. I waited for him to scream, to stop her, to show me that there was still a shred of the boy I raised inside that man. But he did nothing. He just stared at his boots trembling, his hands shaking as he poured sugar into his coffee. "Understood," Mallory said, and hung up the phone. She turned to Brent, her face transforming into a mask of fake concern. "Pull yourself together, honey. It will all be over soon. Just think about the penthouse in New York." They walked past me toward the register. I stood there in the aisle, smelling the faint scent of her expensive perfume mixed with the stench of betrayal. My son was not just a coward. He was an accomplice. As they walked out the door, the bell chimed again. It sounded like a funeral toll. I put the can back on the shelf. The confused father who walked into that store was gone. The man who walked out was a soldier going to war. I drove Diego's rattled Ford like a bat out of hell, heading for the ridge that overlooked Devil's Pass. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the sick realization of what was about to happen. I pulled over behind a cluster of pines hidden from the road below and killed the engine. The silence of the mountains felt heavy like the air before a thunderstorm. I grabbed the heavy plastic case from the passenger seat. It was Toby's high-end drone. The kid had taught me how to fly it last summer, to check on stray cattle in the deep ravines without having to saddle up a horse. I never thought I would use it to witness my own murder. I powered it up, the rotors whirring like angry hornets, and sent it soaring over the canyon edge. The screen on the controller flickered to life, showing the winding gray asphalt of the pass below in high definition. Down on the road, my cherry-red Chevy Silverado came into view. I had called Diego my foreman of 30 years 5 minutes after leaving the store. I told him everything. Being the loyal soul he was, he did not ask questions. He just did exactly what I asked. He had set the truck on the long straightaway leading to the curve, rigged the steering wheel with bungee cords, and wedged a heavy toolbox against the accelerator. Sitting in the driver's seat was not a man, but 3 bales of hay, dressed in my spare Carhartt jacket and an old Stetson. From a distance, it looked exactly like me driving home for lunch. Then I saw the predator. A massive black logging truck was idling in the turnout just before the blind curve. It had no license plates, and the windows were tinted pitch black. As my red Chevy approached the bend, the logging truck roared to life, black smoke belching from its stacks like a dragon waking up. It did not merge into traffic. It attacked. The driver waited until the Chevy was alongside the guardrail, then swerved hard to the right. Metal shrieked against metal, a sound that tore through the mountain silence even from where I stood. The impact was brutal and calculated. The massive steel bumper of the semi crumpled the side of my pickup like it was made of tinfoil. The Chevy did not stand a chance. It spun violently, the tires screaming as they lost traction on the icy asphalt. It smashed through the flimsy wooden guardrail and hung in the air for a heart-stopping second. Then gravity took over. I watched on the small screen, my breath trapped in my throat, as the truck tumbled down the jagged shale face of the cliff. 1 roll, 2 rolls. Then it struck a massive boulder and disintegrated. A fireball erupted, painting the canyon walls in violent shades of orange and black. The logging truck did not stop. It just straightened out and kept driving, disappearing around the bend as if it had just hit a deer. I stared at the burning wreckage on the screen. If I had been stubborn, if I had ignored Toby's call, my body would be burning down there right now. The heat of the fire seemed to reach me even up on the ridge. I lowered the controller, my eyes stinging with tears I refused to shed. Clinton West, the rancher, died in that fire. The man standing on the ridge was someone else entirely. I was a ghost now, and I had work to do. The silence that followed the explosion was heavier than the mountains surrounding me. Down in the canyon, 300 feet below, the twisted metal skeleton of my Silverado lay on its side, engulfed in a rage of orange flames and black smoke. The smell of burning rubber and gasoline drifted up on the wind, stinging my nostrils, but I did not look away. I stood on the ridge, my hands gripping the drone controller, until the plastic casing cracked under the pressure. I was not shaking from the biting wind that cut through my thin canvas jacket. I was shaking from a hollow, freezing sensation that started in my gut and spread to my fingertips. It felt as if someone had reached inside my chest and ripped my heart out by the roots. I was supposed to be in that driver's seat. My skin was supposed to be melting off my bones right now. And the person who made that happen was not a stranger. It was not a business rival or a random criminal. It was Brent, my son. The boy I had held in my arms when he was minutes old, promising him the world. The boy I had taught to ride a horse, to fish in the creek, to shake a man's hand with a firm grip. I closed my eyes and tried to find that boy in my memory, but all I could see was the man in the feed store, standing silent, while his wife ordered his father's execution. I fell to my knees in the dirt, the sharp rocks digging into my jeans. A sound ripped from my throat, a guttural noise that was half sob and half scream, echoing off the canyon walls before being swallowed by the wind. I was not crying because I almost died. I was crying because my son was dead. The Brent I loved, the Brent I believed in, had died the moment he chose money over my life. This wreckage down below was not just a truck. It was the funeral pyre of the West family legacy. Every acre I fenced, every winter I froze, saving calves, every sacrifice I made, I did it for him. And this was his repayment. A cut brake line and a staged accident. I watched the fire burn until the flames turned to smoldering embers. And as the fire died, something inside me turned to stone. The soft part of me, the forgiving father who always wrote checks to cover his son's mistakes, that man burned up in the canyon. I wiped the tears from my face with dirty, grease-stained knuckles. The wind dried the streaks, leaving my skin feeling tight and cold. I stood up slowly. My knees popped, but my back was straighter than it had been in years. I looked down at the smoking ruin one last time. "Goodbye, Clinton West," I whispered into the cold air. "You were a good man, but a good man cannot survive in a nest of vipers." I turned my back on the cliff. The man walking back to the rusted ford was not a father anymore. I was a ghost. I was a nightmare waiting to happen. They wanted a tragedy. They wanted a dead body to bury so they could cash an insurance check and sell my land. Fine. I would let them have their dead body, but I would also give them something they never bargained for. I was going to be the shadow in their hallway, the eyes in the wall, the invisible hand that stripped them of everything they killed for. I climbed into the truck and slammed the door. The time for mercy was over. The time for reckoning had just begun. I sat in the cold, damp silence of the storm shelter, the only light coming from the bank of high-definition monitors on the wall. I had installed these cameras years ago for security against cattle rustlers, never imagining they would become my window into the hell my family had created. On screen 3, I saw the flashing blue and red lights of the sheriff's cruiser wash over the front porch of the ranch house. It was Sheriff Miller, a good man, a man I had played poker with every Friday night for 20 years. Watching him walk up the steps, hat in his hands, knowing he was about to deliver the news of my death, felt like a physical blow. He knocked. The heavy oak door swung open. It was Mallory. She was still wearing that cashmere coat, but she had messed up her hair just enough to look frantic. As soon as Miller spoke, the performance began. Mallory let out a shriek that must have echoed all the way to the barn. She threw herself onto the leather sofa, burying her face in a throw pillow, her shoulders shaking with what looked like violent sobs. From where I sat in the bunker, I could see the truth. I could see her checking the sheriff's reaction through the parting of her fingers. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award, designed to paint her as the grieving, devastated daughter-in-law. It made my stomach turn. Then the camera angle shifted to the armchair by the fireplace. Brent was sitting there. He did not stand up to greet the sheriff. He did not even look up. He was clutching a crystal tumbler of scotch like it was an oxygen mask. It was my scotch. The 20-year-old single malt I saved for special occasions. He was draining it as fast as he could pour it. His face was not the face of a grieving son. It was the face of a man terrified of his own shadow. He was trembling so hard the ice rattled against the glass. When the sheriff mentioned the fire and how there was nothing left of the body, Brent flinched. He squeezed his eyes shut. He knew exactly why there was no body to recover, but the sheriff just took it for shock. Toby was standing by the mantel. The kid was a better actor than I gave him credit for. He had tears in his eyes, real ones likely from the stress of the lie we were living. He listened to the sheriff nodding solemnity, asking about the recovery efforts. He played the part of the strong grandson, stepping up because his father was too broken to function. But then for a split second, Toby did something that gave me the strength to keep breathing in that stale underground air. He walked over to the bookshelf to grab a tissue box for his mother. As he passed the mounted stag head on the wall, where the hidden lens was embedded in the eye, Toby looked straight at it. He did not nod. He did not smile. He just held my gaze through the camera for a heartbeat, his eyes hard and determined. It was a silent message. "We are in this together, Grandpa. Stay hidden. Stay ready." Sheriff Miller stayed for 20 minutes, offering his condolences and promising to handle the paperwork quickly. As soon as the door closed behind him, the weeping stopped instantly. Mallory sat up, her face dry, and looked at Brent with disgust. She kicked his leg with her expensive boot. "Stop drinking, you idiot," she hissed. "We have calls to make. The old man is gone. We need to find the deed to the ranch before the lawyers get here in the morning." I watched them from the darkness, my fists clenched. They thought the game was over. They had no idea the game had just begun. I stood on the grassy knoll overlooking the cemetery, hidden behind the trunk of a massive oak tree. The wind whipped my ragged coat around my legs, but I did not feel the cold. I felt a different kind of chill. Down below, a crowd of black umbrellas gathered around an empty coffin. It was my funeral. A funeral for a man who was still breathing, still watching, still burning, with a rage that kept him alive. I had rubbed dirt into the lines of my face and grown out my gray beard until I looked like just another forgotten soul drifting through town. No one looked up at the old homeless man on the hill. No one except Toby. My grandson stood by the graveside, his young face pale and drawn. He was playing his part perfectly, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew I was up here. He knew the body they were burying was nothing but sandbags and memories. Standing next to him, shedding tears that could win an award, was Mallory. She dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, leaning heavily on my son Brent for support. Brent looked like a man walking to the gallows. His eyes were red not from grief, but from the whiskey I knew he had been drinking since breakfast. He stared at the hole in the ground as if he wanted to jump in and hide from his own conscience. Then a black limousine pulled up to the curb. My jaw tightened. Garrison Ford stepped out. The man was a vulture in an Italian suit. He walked toward the grave with a solemn expression that did not reach his eyes. He approached Mallory, and what happened next made my blood boil. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture that lingered too long, too intimate for a mere business associate. He leaned in close, whispering something in her ear. I did not need a microphone to know what he said. I could see it in the way Mallory's posture changed. She straightened up, a subtle smirk touching her lips, before she hid it behind her handkerchief. I pulled my binoculars from my pocket. Through the lenses, I saw her lips move. "The ground is ours now," she whispered. Ford nodded, a predatory smile flashing across his face. I lowered the binoculars, my hands trembling with fury. They were not mourning me. They were celebrating a merger. My death was just a line item in their business plan. I watched as they lowered the empty casket into the earth. Each shovelful of dirt was a promise I made to myself. They thought they were burying Clinton West, but they were planting a seed of vengeance that would grow into a forest of ruin. I turned away from the grave, pulling my collar up against the wind. Enjoy your victory lap, Ford, because the race isn't over. It has only just begun. The lawyer's office smelled of old leather and expensive mistakes. From my underground bunker, I watched the live video feed on the second monitor. I had asked Holloway, my attorney and oldest friend, to place a small camera in the spine of a law book on the shelf behind his desk. He was a good man, a man who valued justice over a paycheck, and it was killing him to sit there and play a part in this charade. He adjusted his glasses, his hands trembling slightly, as he broke the wax seal on the envelope. Sitting across from him were the vultures. Mallory had traded her fake tears for a look of predatory anticipation. She sat on the edge of her chair, her hand gripping Brent's knee so hard I could see her knuckles turning white. Brent just stared at the floor, looking like a man waiting for the hangman's noose. And then there was Toby. My grandson sat in the corner, separated from his parents, looking small in his dark suit. He knew what was coming. We had discussed it, but watching it happen was a different kind of pain. I, Clinton West, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. Holloway's voice was steady, but I heard the strain in it. He was reading a forgery. I knew it was a forgery because I had watched Mallory practice that signature months ago when I was bedridden with the flu. She thought I was asleep, but I saw her tracing my name over and over on a legal pad. I let her do it. I let her think she was clever because a trap only works if the rat thinks the cheese is free. To my son Brent West and his wife Mallory, I leave the entirety of the West Ranch, including all livestock machinery and land rights. I also bequeath the entirety of my savings and investment accounts to be managed by them solely. Mallory let out a breath that sounded like a hiss of steam. She squeezed Brent's knee. "We did it," she mouthed. She did not even try to hide the greed in her eyes. She was already spending the money in her head, redecorating my home, buying new cars, erasing every trace of the man who built it all. Then came the knife in the heart. Holloway paused. He looked over the rim of his glasses at Toby, and to my grandson, Tobias West. The room went silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I leave nothing. It is my wish that he learns the value of hard work without the crutch of family wealth. It was a lie. A cruel, vicious lie written by Mallory to cut her own son out of his birthright. She wanted it all for herself. I saw a flicker of a smile on her lips, a look of pure triumph. She turned to Toby, her face composing itself into a mask of fake sympathy. "Oh, Toby. Honey, I am so sorry. Your grandfather could be so harsh. But do not worry, your father and I will take care of you as long as you follow our rules." Toby stood up slowly. He did not cry. He did not scream. He looked at his mother with eyes that were too old for a 19-year-old face. "I do not want his money," Toby said, his voice quiet but filling the room. "I never cared about the ranch or the accounts. I just wanted my grandfather. Keep the money, Mom. It is clearly all you ever loved anyway. He turned and walked out of the office, the door clicking shut with a finality that made Brent flinch. Holloway closed the folder. The deed was done. They had the paper. They had the power. But as I watched Mallory hug my spineless son celebrating their victory, I leaned back in my chair in the dark. Enjoy the paper, Mallory. Because paper burns. And I was holding the match. The sun had barely risen over the eastern ridge when the purges began. From the grainy black and white feed of the security cameras, I watched my legacy being dismantled piece by piece. Mallory stood on the front porch of the main house wrapped in a silk robe that probably cost more than my foreman made in a year. She held a clipboard like a weapon, her voice shrill and cutting through the crisp morning air. Lined up in the driveway were the people who had built this ranch alongside me. Diego, who had taught me how to mend a fence properly. Sarah the cook, who had made soup for Brent when he was sick with chickenpox. Old Man Miller, who knew every acre of this land better than he knew his own children. You are all fired, Mallory announced, not even looking them in the eye. We are modernizing this operation. We do not need a bunch of dusty old relics draining our payroll. Pack your things. You have 1 hour to vacate the premises. Diego stepped forward, his hat in his hands. But Mrs. West, he said softly, his voice thick with confusion. Mr. Clint promised us. Mr. Clint is dead, Mallory screamed, her face twisting into a mask of ugly rage. And his promises died with him. Now get off my property before I call the sheriff. I watched Diego's shoulders slump. It was the posture of a man who had lost his purpose. One by one, they turned away defeated. 30 years of loyalty erased in 30 seconds by a woman who had never worked a day in her life. I sat in my bunker, my fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. I wanted to smash the monitor. I wanted to storm up there and throw her off my land. But I couldn't. Not yet. Then she did something unforgivable. As the workers were leaving Buster, my old Australian shepherd trotted out onto the porch. He was deaf in one ear and moved slow, but he was the best cattle dog I ever had. He barked once, a low woof, probably wondering where I was. Shut that thing up, Mallory shrieked. She turned to one of the new hired hands, a rough-looking man I didn't recognize. Get rid of it. It's old, it smells, and it's noisy. Take it out back and shoot it. My heart stopped. No, not Buster. The hired hand grabbed Buster by the collar. The old dog didn't fight. He just wagged his tail, thinking he was going for a walk. I was halfway out of my chair, ready to blow my cover, when I saw movement near the barn. It was Toby. He intercepted the man before he reached the tree line. I saw them arguing. Toby was fierce, his gestures angry. He shoved a wad of cash into the man's hand. His tuition money, I realized, with a pang of guilt. The man shrugged, took the money, and handed the leash to Toby. Toby scooped the heavy dog into his arms and ran toward the old woodshed, checking over his shoulder to make sure his mother wasn't watching. He hid Buster in the back of his truck, covering him with a tarp. I sank back into my chair, letting out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My grandson had saved my dog. But more than that, he had saved the last scrap of humanity left on this ranch. Mallory had declared war on everything I loved. She thought she was cleaning house. She had no idea she was just adding fuel to the fire that was coming for her. It did not take long for Mallory to erase 40 years of my life. From the cold darkness of my bunker, I watched on the monitor as she directed the contractors like a general commanding an army of destruction. They started with my study. That room was not just an office. It was the heart of the ranch. It was where I planned the cattle drives, where I signed the contracts that kept this town employed, and where I sat late at night looking at the photo of my late wife, Martha, when the silence got too loud. "Tear it all down," Mallory shouted, pointing a manicured finger at the oak paneling. "I want open concept. I want light. This place smells like old men and cigars." I watched a young worker no older than Toby hesitate as he reached for the framed picture of Martha on my desk. It was taken on our honeymoon in Yellowstone. She was laughing, the wind catching her hair. It was my most prized possession. The boy looked at Mallory, clearly uncomfortable. "Trash," she barked. "Throw it all in the dumpster. We are not keeping dusty relics of dead people." The boy flinched and tossed the frame into a black garbage bag. I felt a physical pain in my chest, sharp and hot. That was not just a picture. Oh, that was my life. Then came the medals. My Purple Heart from Vietnam, the Cattleman of the Year, awards the framed first dollar I ever earned. They all went into the trash bags. Clink, crash, gone. But she was not done. The camera in the hallway showed her marching toward the small prayer room at the end of the corridor. It was a quiet space with a stained glass window where Martha used to read her Bible. I had kept it exactly as she left it for 10 years. "This will be perfect for my yoga studio," Mallory declared, spinning around the room. "Rip out that hideous window. Put in floor-to-ceiling mirrors. And I want a sauna in the corner." I saw Brent standing in the doorway. He was swaying slightly, a fresh glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked at the room, then at his wife. "Mallory," he slurred. "Maybe we should keep Mom's room." "Shut up, Brent," she snapped without looking at him. "You got your whiskey collection. I get my spa. Unless you want to go live in the barn with the dog." Brent looked down at his drink and said nothing. He turned and walked away, leaving his mother's memory to be gutted by strangers. I leaned back in my chair, the light from the screen reflecting in my eyes. They were stripping the soul out of my house. They were turning it into a hollow shell, just like themselves. But they forgot one thing. A house is just wood and stone. The true foundation of the West family was sitting underground, watching, waiting, and getting ready to bring the whole thing crashing down on their heads. "Go ahead, Mallory. Decorate your spa. You are going to need a place to sweat when the heat turns up." I exchanged my king-size bed for a military cot that smelled of mildew and rust. My dining room table was now a stack of ammo crates, and my gourmet meals were replaced by cold beans eaten straight from the can with a plastic spoon. I was living in a Cold War fallout shelter I had built on the far north edge of the property back in the 80s, a relic from a time when we thought the Russians were the enemy. It turned out the real enemy was sleeping in my master bedroom. The bunker was cold, the kind of damp chill that settles into your bones and stays there, but the rage burning in my gut kept me warm enough. The only light in the concrete box came from the blue glow of the surveillance monitors. I had spent a fortune upgrading the security system years ago, hiding cameras in the chandeliers, the bookshelves, and even the stables to catch cattle thieves. Now those lenses captured the daily theft of my legacy. I sat there for hours, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep, watching the live feed like it was the only show on Earth. I saw things I had been too blind to see when I was alive. I saw the way Mallory looked at the staff with pure contempt when she thought no one was watching. I saw her kicking mud off her boots onto the Persian rug my mother had stitched by hand. I saw her laughing on the phone with her friends, mocking Brent for being spineless, bragging about how easy it was to manipulate the grieving widow role. Every time she committed an offense, I wrote it down. I had a black notebook, leather-bound, that was quickly filling up. Page 1, firing Diego. Page 2, the order to kill Buster. Page 3, destroying Martha's prayer room. It was not just a diary. It was a ledger of sins, a bill of indictment. I noted the dates, the times, and the specific nature of the betrayal. Sometimes I would see Brent wandering the halls at night, clutching his bottle like a lifeline. He looked like a ghost haunting a house he did not belong in. I watched him pause in front of my old office door, his hand hovering over the knob, before pulling away in shame. A part of me, the father part, wanted to reach through the screen and shake him to tell him it was not too late to grow a backbone. But then I would look at the next monitor and see Mallory trying on my wife's jewelry, preening in the mirror, and the pity would turn back into steel. This underground existence was stripping away everything that was soft in me. I was becoming something primal, a hunter waiting in the tall grass. I tapped the pen against the notebook, the rhythmic sound echoing off the concrete walls. Keep spending, Mallory. Keep laughing. Every dollar you waste, every insult you throw is just another nail in the coffin I am building for you. You think you buried Clinton West. You have no idea that you just planted him, and the harvest is going to be bitter. The rusty iron door of the bunker creaked open just a sliver, letting in a slice of moonlight and a cold draft. I had my hand on the hidden pistol under the desk before I recognized the knock 3 shorts 1 long. It was Toby. My grandson slipped inside, shivering, clutching a heavy backpack. He looked exhausted. Dark circles bruised his eyes, and his hands were raw from doing the chores the fired ranch hands used to do. He set the bag down on the ammo crates. It was filled with supplies, fresh batteries, protein bars, and a stack of mail he had intercepted from the mailbox before Mallory could see it. "It is getting bad up there," Grandpa Toby whispered, sinking onto the cot. "Mom is talking about selling the south pasture to Ford by the end of the week. She says the cash flow is tight. She bought a Porsche yesterday." "A Porsche? While the horses are eating cheap hay." I handed him a cup of instant coffee. "Let her buy it," I said, my voice steady. "Let her buy 10 of them." Toby looked at me, confusion clouding his face. "But if she sells the land to Ford, it is over. Once he starts drilling for that lithium, the ranch is ruined. We have to stop her. Maybe we should just call the sheriff now. We have enough footage." I shook my head. "Not yet. We don't just want to stop them, Toby. We want to bury them. We need to cut off the head of the snake, and that is not your mother. It is Garrison Ford." I reached under the mattress of the cot and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. It was old, the edges worn smooth. I placed it on the crate between us. Toby opened it. Inside were documents that looked like gibberish to most people, complex corporate structures, holding companies and blind trusts. "You think I spent 40 years just herding cattle?" I asked, tapping the paper. "The West Ranch is just the face of the operation. See this company, Broken Spur Holdings, I own it. And this one, Blue Sky Ventures, I own that too. And guess who owes Blue Sky Ventures $2 million in high-interest construction loans?" Toby's eyes widened as he read the name on the loan document. "Garrison Ford." "Exactly," I smiled, a cold, hard smile. "And guess who holds the mortgage on your father's gambling debts through a shell company in Nevada?" Toby looked up at me, awe replacing the exhaustion in his eyes. "You own their debt. You own them. I own the air they breathe," I said. "I just haven't sent them the bill yet. But the invoice is coming due. Tomorrow Blue Sky Ventures is going to call in Ford's loan. He will be desperate for cash. That is when we bait the trap. We make him think the only way out is to buy the ranch cheap and flip it. We make him bet everything he has on a deal that will never happen." Toby grinned, a flash of the boy he used to be before this nightmare started. "You are terrifying, Grandpa." I patted his shoulder. "I am just a businessman, son. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow you have to go back up there and play the victim. Let them kick you. Let them laugh. Because when the dust settles, you and I are going to be the only ones standing." The trap was set. Now it was time to tighten the noose. I sat in the flickering blue light of my bunker, sipping cold coffee, watching Monitor 4. It showed the long, winding driveway leading up to the main house. A black SUV with tinted windows rolled up slowly, the gravel crunching under its tires. It was not the sheriff, and it certainly wasn't a friend. To my son Brent, the man stepping out of that vehicle was a nightmare made of flesh and bone. To me, he was just Marcus, a private security contractor I had hired from Billings, who could act the part of a terrifying debt collector perfectly. Brent was sitting on the porch steps, nursing his 3rd drink of the morning, looking out over the land he thought he finally owned. When he saw the size of Marcus, a man who stood 6'4" and looked like he chewed barbed wire for breakfast, Brent scrambled to his feet, spilling whiskey down the front of his shirt. I turned up the volume on the receiver. Mr. West Marcus rumbled his voice deep and flat. "We have a problem." Brent tried to put on a brave face, the same arrogant mask he wore when he was spending my money, but his knees were knocking together. "Who are you? Get off my property before I call the police." Marcus didn't blink. He just took a step closer, invading Brent's personal space until my son had to lean back against the porch railing. "We don't care about the police, Brent. And we don't care that your daddy died. In fact, that is why I am here. Your debt note from the Vegas trip last month has been sold. The new holder isn't as patient as the casino was." I watched Brent's face drain of color. He knew exactly what debt Marcus was talking about. $500,000 lost at the blackjack tables in a single weekend. A debt he thought he could hide from me. A debt he thought would disappear in the chaos of my funeral. "I don't have that kind of cash liquid right now." Brent stammered, his voice cracking. "My inheritance is in probate. The lawyers said it could take months. Tell your boss I am good for it. I own all of this now." He swept his hand across the horizon, gesturing to the thousands of acres of my land. Marcus laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "My boss doesn't want land, Brent. He wants his 500 grand, and he wants it in 48 hours. If the money isn't wired by Friday noon, we aren't coming back to talk. We are coming back to break things. And we will start with your legs." Marcus turned and walked back to the SUV, leaving the threat hanging in the cold mountain air. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. As the black car drove away, Brent collapsed onto the porch steps, burying his face in his hands. He was hyperventilating. I watched him with a cold detachment. I was the boss Marcus was talking about. I had bought my son's debt through my shell company 2 days ago. I was the one squeezing him. It was cruel, perhaps, but necessary. I needed him desperate. I needed him terrified. Because a terrified man makes mistakes. A terrified man looks for a quick way out. And I knew exactly where he would run. He would run to Mallory. And together in their panic to pay off this debt before Friday, they would do the one thing that would destroy them. They would try to sell the land fast and cheap. They would walk right into the lion's mouth, never knowing that the lion was their own father. I closed the notebook. The pressure was on. Now let's see them crack. The debt collector's threat hung over the ranch like a storm cloud, and inside the main house the panic was palpable. I watched from monitor 2 as Mallory paced the living room, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor. She was not worried about Brent's legs getting broken. She was worried about her lifestyle being interrupted. She poured herself another glass of wine, her hand shaking just enough to spill a drop on the white rug. She did not even notice. "We have to sell Brent," she snapped, spinning around to face my son. He was slumped on the sofa, head in his hands, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in 2 days. "But the South pasture," Brent mumbled. "Dad always said that was the most valuable land we had. The water rights alone are worth millions. If we sell it now, we are practically giving it away." Mallory laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Your dad is dead, Brent, and unless you want to join him, we need $500,000 by Friday. Garrison Ford called me this morning. He is willing to take the South pasture off our hands. He is offering cash, fast close." I leaned forward in my chair. 600,000. That land was worth 6 million easily, even without the lithium deposits I knew were under the soil. Ford was lowballing them, preying on their desperation, just like I knew he would. It was a predatory offer, the kind that makes you sick to your stomach, but to a drowning man, even a leaky lifeboat looks like salvation. It is too low. Mallory, even Brent, had enough sense to see that. It is insulting. "Do you have a better idea?" Mallory screamed, throwing her wine glass into the fireplace. It shattered the sound, making Brent flinch. "Do you want those goons to come back and break your knees?" Or worse, do you want them to come for me, for my jewelry, for my car? We sell the land, we pay the debt, and we still have 100 grand to play with. Sign the papers, Brent. Do it now. She shoved a contract onto the coffee table. It was already drawn up. Ford must have had it ready for weeks, just waiting for the right moment to strike. I watched Brent pick up the pen. His hand hovered over the signature line. He looked at the contract, then at his wife. He was looking for reassurance, for partnership. Instead, he found only contempt. Fine, he whispered, defeated. I will sign. I watched him scrawl his name, signing away his birthright for pennies on the dollar. My heart didn't ache this time. It hardened. They were walking right into the trap. Ford thought he was stealing candy from a baby. He didn't know the candy was poisoned, and Mallory thought she had solved her problem. She didn't know she had just opened the door to a much bigger one. I picked up my phone and dialed Holloway. It was time to introduce the second player in this game. It was time for Phoenix Holdings to make an offer they couldn't refuse. I picked up the secure line to Holloway. It was time to play the ace up my sleeve. Phoenix Holdings was a ghost company I had established 10 years ago for this exact purpose, a rainy day fund that had grown into a hurricane. It existed only on paper, a faceless entity with a bank account full of my money and a mailing address in the Cayman Islands. To the outside world, it was just another aggressive investment firm. To Mallory, it was about to look like a lifeline made of gold. I watched Holloway on the screen as he dialed the number. He was sitting in his office looking every bit the professional attorney, but I knew his palms were sweating. This was the pivot point. If Mallory got suspicious, if she decided to stick with Ford just to be safe, the whole plan would crumble. But I was banking on one thing: Mallory's greed. Greed makes people stupid. It makes them blind. And right now, Mallory was blinded by the need for cash and the desire for more of it. Holloway put the call on speaker so I could hear every word in the bunker. Mrs. West, he said, his voice smooth and authoritative. I have some unexpected news. A new interested party has emerged regarding the South Pasture, an investment group called Phoenix Holdings. I saw Mallory stop pacing in the living room. She held the phone to her ear, her eyebrows raising. Phoenix Holdings. Who are they? I have never heard of them. They are an international conglomerate. Holloway lied without missing a beat. They specialize in rapid land acquisitions. They heard about the potential sale, and they are willing to outbid Mr. Ford. They are offering $850,000. I saw the calculation happen in real time on her face. $250,000 more than Ford. That was a new wardrobe. That was a first-class ticket to Paris. That was freedom. Her eyes practically glowed. She looked at Brent, mouthing the numbers with wide, excited eyes. But there is a catch, Holloway continued, dropping the hook. And it is a non-negotiable one. They require an immediate close. They want the deed transferred and the papers signed by tomorrow morning at 9. No due diligence period. No inspections. Just a clean, fast break. They want the land now. Mallory bit her lip. She looked at the clock. It was incredibly fast, almost reckless. Any smart business person would ask why a company wanted land so badly they would skip inspections. But Mallory was not a business person. She was a desperate gambler holding a losing hand, and someone had just offered her a way to win the pot. This deal solved everything. It paid off the debt collector before Friday and left her with a massive cushion of cash to start her new life. Do it. She breathed into the phone, her voice trembling with excitement. Draw up the papers. I will tell Ford to take a hike. I leaned back in my chair, a cold smile spreading across my face. She had done it. She had taken the bait. She did not know that Phoenix Holdings was me. She did not know that she was selling my land back to me using my own money. And she certainly did not know it. By rushing the sale, she was bypassing the standard legal checks that might have warned her about the trap I had laid in the transfer clauses. I watched her hang up the phone and turn to Brent, squealing with delight. "We are rich, Brent. We are finally rich." She grabbed his hands and spun him around. Brent looked relieved, the color finally coming back to his face. He thought he was saved. He thought the nightmare was over. I took a sip of my stale coffee. "Dance while you can, Mallory, because the music is about to stop. You just invited the devil into your house and you do not even know he is already sitting at the table. The trap is sprung. Now we just wait for the snap." The following morning, Mallory sat at the head of the dining table as if she were the Queen of England. She had dressed for the occasion in a sharp white suit, her hair pulled back, projecting the image of a woman in control. Brent sat beside her, looking slightly less nauseous than the day before, probably because he believed the check from Phoenix Holdings was just an hour away. The papers were spread out before them, crisp and ready to sign away my legacy. But then the phone rang. It was Holloway. I sat in my bunker watching the color drain from Mallory's face on the surveillance monitor. She put the call on speaker, her voice tight. "What do you mean there is a problem? We agreed on the price. Send the notary over." "I am afraid it is not that simple." Mrs. West Holloway's voice came through calm and professional. "I just received a notification from the county clerk's office this morning. It seems there is a dispute regarding the eastern boundary line of the South pasture." "Dispute?" Mallory screeched, standing up so fast her chair tipped over. "What dispute?" "That fence has been there for 50 years. That is exactly the issue." Holloway lied smoothly. "A neighbor has filed a claim stating that the fence line encroaches on their property by 10 feet. Under state law, we cannot transfer the deed until a survey is completed and the dispute is resolved." I allowed myself a small chuckle in the darkness. The neighbor was actually a shell corporation I controlled, and the claim was a piece of paper I had filed 3 years ago, just in case I ever needed to freeze the assets. It was a legal landmine I had planted in my own backyard, waiting for someone foolish enough to step on it. "How long will that take?" Brent asked, his voice trembling. "We need that money today." "Weeks, maybe months," Holloway said, delivering the death blow. "Surveys take time, especially in the winter, and until it is cleared, the title is frozen. Phoenix Holdings is aware of the situation. They are willing to wait, but they cannot release the funds until the title is clear." No, Mallory slammed her fist on the table. "We do not have months. Tell them to waive it. Tell them we will knock 50,000 off the price. I cannot do that, Mrs. West. It is a legal requirement. My hands are tied." The line went dead. The silence in the dining room was deafening. The ticking of the grandfather clock sounded like a countdown. Mallory stared at the phone as if it had just bitten her. The lifeline she thought she had grabbed had just turned into a noose. "This is your fault," she screamed, turning on Brent. "You and your stupid gambling debt. Oh, what are we going to do?" "Those goons will be here tomorrow." Brent put his head in his hands. I don't know, Mal. Maybe we can ask Ford for a loan just to cover the debt." Mallory's eyes narrowed. "Ask the man we just tried to screw over for a loan. He will eat us alive, Brent. He will want everything." Exactly. That was the plan. I watched them crumble, the panic setting in like a fever. They were trapped between a rock and a hard place, and I was the one pushing the walls in. Desperation makes people do reckless things, and reckless is exactly where I needed them to be. The financial noose I had woven was not just tight, it was strangling. I sat in my bunker, the glow of the monitors illuminating the satisfaction on my face as I executed the final command on my laptop. Freeze all assets. It was a simple click, but its impact would be devastating. Up in the main house, Mallory was unaware that her world was about to collapse. She was currently at the most expensive boutique in Billings, a 90-minute drive from the ranch, trying to spend money she did not technically have yet. I switched the feed to the GPS tracker in her car, watching the little dot parked outside Leger & Co. She had taken my vintage Mercedes, the one I only drove on Sundays. That car was a symbol of dignity. She used it as a shopping cart. I picked up my phone and called the bank manager, a man who owed me his career. "Do it," I said, "and make sure it is loud." I could not see inside the store, but I could imagine it perfectly. Mallory would be at the counter, a pile of silk scarves and Italian handbags stacked high. She would slap down her platinum card, the one linked to the ranch's main operating account, with that smug look she always wore. The clerk would swipe it. Decline. Mallory would laugh, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Try it again," she would say. "It must be a mistake." Decline. Then she would try the gold card. Decline. Then the debit card. Decline. I watched the GPS dot leave the store abruptly and speed back toward the highway. She was driving fast, erratic. The panic was setting in. When she burst through the front door of the ranch house an hour later, she looked like a banshee. Her hair was windblown, her face red with humiliation. Brent was in the kitchen eating a sandwich made from the cheap bologna they had to buy because the cook was gone. "You useless idiot," Mallory screamed, throwing her purse at him. It hit him square in the chest, knocking the sandwich out of his hand. "They cut me off. Every single card. I was standing there like a beggar." Brent stammered, picking up the purse. "What?" "That is impossible. The lawyers said the accounts were frozen until the probate cleared, but we had the emergency line of credit." "There is no line of credit," Mallory shrieked. "I called the bank. They said the primary guarantor revoked it. That was your father. How can a dead man revoke a credit line?" Brent went pale. I don't know. Maybe it was automatic. Maybe the bank saw the death certificate and locked everything down. We have 24 hours to pay that debt collector." Mallory paced the kitchen like a caged tiger. "And now I cannot even buy gas to get to the lawyer's office." "You need to fix this, Brent. Go sell something. Sell the tractors. Sell the horses. I don't care. Just get me cash." I leaned back in my chair, the ghost of a smile touching my lips. They were beginning to cannibalize each other. The stress was stripping away the veneer of their marriage, revealing the rot underneath. Mallory did not love Brent. She loved his access. And now that the access was denied, she looked at him with pure hatred. This was the breaking point. This was where they would make the fatal mistake, and I would be there to catch them when they fell. The atmosphere inside the ranch house was toxic enough to choke on. From the safety of my underground bunker, I watched the inevitable explosion I knew was coming. The financial pressure I had applied was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was squeezing the life out of their marriage. On the high-definition screen, the living room looked like a war zone. A vase lay shattered on the floor. Brent was pacing back and forth, his hair disheveled, a bottle of bourbon swinging loosely in his hand. Mallory stood by the fireplace, her arms crossed, her face twisted into a scowl of pure venom. "You are useless," she spat, her voice shrill and distorted by the microphone's gain. "I told you to call Ford again. I told you to beg if you had to. We need cash, Brent. The power company just sent a final notice. Do you understand what that means? They are going to cut the lights off in this house by tomorrow night." Brent stopped pacing. He took a long swig from the bottle, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked at her, and for the first time in his life, I saw a spark of genuine anger in his eyes. It was weak, but it was there. "I called him," Brent yelled back. "I called him 5 times. He isn't answering. Nobody is answering, Mallory. It is like we have the plague. Maybe if you were half the man your father was, people would respect you," Mallory sneered. Maybe if you didn't reek of whiskey at noon, Ford would take your call. That hit a nerve. Brent slammed the bottle down on the coffee table so hard I thought it would crack the glass. "Don't you talk about him," he shouted. "My father built this place from dirt. He knew how to handle people. He knew how to survive. If Dad were still alive, he wouldn't let this happen. He would fix this. He wouldn't let us lose everything." The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. Mallory walked over to him slowly. Her eyes were wide, manic. She stopped inches from his face. "If he were alive," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. She pulled back her hand and slapped him. The sound was sharp and loud, echoing through the speakers in my bunker. Brent stumbled back, clutching his cheek. "Shut your mouth, you pathetic drunk," Mallory screamed, stepping into his space. "Do not dare talk about him saving us. You are the one who crawled under his truck. You are the one who cut the brake lines with your own hands while I kept watch. You killed him, Brent. We killed him. So do not stand there and whine about how much you miss Daddy. He is dead because you wanted his money. And now that we have it, you are too stupid to keep it." I sat frozen in my chair. My finger hovered over the keyboard. I had suspected it. I had known it in my gut. But hearing the explicit confirmation that my own son held the knife that severed the brake line, was a physical blow. But I didn't crumble. I didn't cry. I pressed a single key on my laptop. Recording saved. I looked at the file name on the screen. Evidence Confession 01.mp4. That was it. That was the nail in the coffin. I could have gone to the police right then. I could have ended it. But looking at Mallory's face, seeing the pure evil radiating off her, I knew prison wasn't enough. Not yet. I wanted them to lose everything first. I wanted them to feel the cold, the hunger, and the shame. I leaned back, watching Brent weep on the sofa, while Mallory poured herself a drink. "You just signed your own death warrant, kids. And you did it in high definition." The GPS dot on my screen showed Mallory's car parked at the Obsidian, the most discreet and expensive hotel in Billings. She was not there to shop this time. She was there to beg. From my bunker, I tapped into the hotel's security system. It was not hard. I owned the building through a subsidiary. I switched the feed to the penthouse suite, room 1201. The camera hidden in the smoke detector gave me a perfect view. Garrison Ford was sitting on the velvet sofa, sipping a martini, looking like the cat that ate the canary. Mallory was pacing the room, her movements frantic. She looked disheveled, a stark contrast to her usual polished appearance. "I need the money, Garrison," she pleaded, stopping in front of him. "Just a loan. Until the sale goes through. That debt collector said he would be back tomorrow." Ford laughed, a low, rumbling sound that made my skin crawl. He stood up and walked over to her, running a hand down her arm. "You are so beautiful when you are desperate, Mallory. But business is business. Why would I loan you money when I can just wait for you to default and take the land for free?" Mallory pulled away, shocked. "What? We had a deal. I got rid of the old man for you." "I did everything you asked." Ford grabbed her wrist, pulling her close. His voice turned cold. "You did it because you are greedy, Mallory. Do not pretend you did it for me. And let's be honest. You are not really a partner in this. You are just a loose end." He pushed her onto the sofa. I watched in disgust as he leaned over her. "You want the money," he whispered. "Then earn it." I turned away from the screen as they fell onto the cushions, my stomach churning. But I kept the recording running. I needed every second of it. 10 minutes later, as they lay there, Ford lit a cigar and let the truth slip out in a puff of smoke. "You know why I want that south pasture so bad?" he asked, looking at the ceiling. "It is not for grazing cattle. My geologists found a lithium deposit under that soil worth $50 million. Once I get the deed, I am going to strip mine that whole valley." Mallory sat up, eyes wide. "Lithium. You knew. And you only offered $600,000. Ford smirked. That is how the game is played, sweetheart. And you were too busy spending your father-in-law's money to notice you were sitting on a gold mine. I hit the save button. Evidence adultery fraud 01.mp4. I had them. I had the affair. I had the confession about the lithium. And I had the proof that Ford knew about the murder plot. They thought they were the hunters devouring the carcass of my estate. They did not know they were just prey fattening themselves up for the slaughter. I closed the laptop. The final piece of the puzzle was in place. Tomorrow, the trap snaps shut, and it is going to be magnificent. The temperature outside had dropped to single digits, but the heat inside the main house was reaching a boiling point. I sat in the bunker wrapped in a wool blanket watching Monitor 3. The kitchen was a chaotic mess of packing boxes and expensive wine bottles. Mallory was in a rampage. She had found a stash of winter coats in the mudroom coats that belonged to the ranch hands she had fired yesterday. Instead of donating them or giving them back, she was tossing them into a trash bag with the intention of burning them in the incinerator. Toby walked in from the garage, shaking snow off his boots. He looked exhausted. When he saw his mother throwing away Diego's heavy coat, the one the old man had worn for 10 winters, something inside him snapped. He grabbed the bag from her hand. "Mom, stop it," he shouted. "These people gave their lives to this place. You cannot just treat their property like garbage." Mallory spun around, her eyes glazed with wine and power. She looked at her son, not with love, but with the same disdain she held for me. "You are just like your grandfather," she spat. "Soft, weak, always caring about the help more than your own blood. If you love these losers so much, why don't you go live like them?" She grabbed Toby's arm and dragged him to the back door. She was strong in her fury. She shoved him out into the swirling snow without his coat. "And do not come back until you learn who actually signs the checks around here," she screamed, slamming the heavy oak door and throwing the deadbolt. I watched my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for Brent to step in. Waiting for my son to open the door and let his child back in from the freezing cold. But Brent just sat at the kitchen island, staring into his drink, pretending he didn't hear a thing. He was not just a coward anymore. He was a hollow shell of a man. I switched the camera feed to the external view. Toby did not bang on the door. He did not beg. He stood tall, wiped the snow from his face, and walked toward the old tack room in the horse barn. Inside the barn, camera view, I saw him curl up on a pile of horse blankets in the corner. Buster, the dog he had saved from execution, limped over and curled up next to him, offering his body heat. My grandson, the heir to the West Empire, was sleeping in the straw like a refugee because he had a conscience. That was the breaking point. I had planned to let them sweat for another 2 days, to let the fear really marinate until the auction on Friday. But watching Toby shivering in the dark changed the timeline. I was not going to wait. I reached for the satellite phone and dialed Holloway's private number. "Wake up the judge," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Move the foreclosure notice up. We are not waiting for the auction. We are taking the house back tomorrow." They wanted a war, they just woke up the general. The morning light did not bring hope to the West Ranch. It only brought a cold, gray reality that seeped through the windows of the main house. I sat in my bunker, rubbing my tired eyes, watching Mallory on the surveillance feed. She looked like a woman on the edge of a breakdown. Her perfect hair was matted, her eyes were swollen, and she was pacing the kitchen floor in her silk robe, clutching her phone like it was a holy relic. She was waiting for a miracle. Instead, she got a death sentence. When her phone finally rang, the sound made her jump. She scrambled to answer it, putting it on speaker so she could frantically search through her pile of unpaid bills while she talked. It was Garrison Ford. But the voice that came through the speaker was not the smooth, seductive tone she was used to. It was cold, flat, and sharp as a razor blade. Mallory Ford said, cutting off her desperate hello. "Shut up and listen. I am done playing games with you. Garrison, please," she sobbed. "I just need a bridge loan. Just until the probate clears. I promise I will sign the south pasture over to you the second. Stop, Ford barked. There is no loan, and there is no private sale. You are too incompetent to handle a direct transfer without messing it up. I have changed the terms. Mallory froze in the middle of the kitchen. What do you mean, Friday? Ford said. The town hall is holding a public auction for foreclosed properties. I want you to list the entire ranch. Not just the pasture, the whole damn thing. House, barns, livestock, and land. You are going to put it on the block as a distressed asset sale. Are you crazy? Mallory screamed. That is suicide. We will lose millions. If it goes to auction, it will sell for pennies on the dollar. Exactly, Ford replied, and I could practically hear the cruel smile in his voice. That is the point. I will be the only one with the liquidity to bid. I will pick up your empire for a fraction of its value, legal and clean. No title disputes. No waiting for probate. Just a gavel strike and it is mine. I will not do it, Mallory hissed. I will find another buyer. I will not let you steal my inheritance. Then Ford dropped the hammer. You have no choice, Mallory, because if that ranch is not listed on the auction docket by noon. Today, I am going to take a little drive to the sheriff's office. What are you talking about? I am talking about the mechanic, Ford said softly. The one you paid to tamper with the old man's truck. Did you really think I would let you kill Clinton West without keeping some insurance? I have the texts, Mallory. I have the bank transfer you made to the guy. I have everything. Mallory dropped the phone. It clattered onto the kitchen island. She grabbed the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white, looking like she was about to vomit. You have two choices, Ford continued, his voice echoing in the silent kitchen. You can be a rich widow who unfortunately had to sell the family farm to pay off debts. Or you can be a convicted murderer spending the rest of her life in a 6x8 cell. It is up to you. Friday. Noon. Do not disappoint me. The line went dead. I watched Mallory slide down to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. She was trapped. She thought she was the queen of the chessboard, but she just realized she was nothing but a pawn. Ford had outplayed her. He wanted the ranch, and he wanted it cheap. He was forcing a fire sale, convinced that no one in this small town had the money to outbid him. He was right. Nobody in town had that kind of cash, except for one man. And that man was currently sitting 50 feet underground, watching the show and checking his bank balance. Bring it on, Ford. Let's go to auction. The snow was coming down in thick, heavy flakes, blanketing the cemetery, in a silence that felt almost holy. I had followed Brent from the house, keeping a safe distance in the shadows of the pine trees that lined the perimeter. He wasn't driving. He had walked the 2 miles in the freezing cold, stumbling occasionally, but keeping his head down against the wind. When he reached the plot where the fresh mound of earth sat under a temporary marker, he collapsed. It wasn't a fall. It was a surrender. I stood behind the trunk of an ancient oak tree, my breath misting in the air, watching my son weep over an empty coffin. For the first time in days, he wasn't holding a bottle. He was holding onto the cold dirt, his fingers digging into the freezing soil, as if he were trying to pull me back up from the underworld. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. What was left was a 45-year-old man who realized he was an orphan in a world he wasn't strong enough to navigate. Dad. I heard him choke out, his voice cracking with a rawness that tore at my heart. I am so sorry. God, I am so sorry. I didn't want this. I just wanted... I don't even know what I wanted anymore. He rested his forehead against the damp earth. She is going to sell it all, Dad. She is going to sell the ranch to Ford. I can't stop her. I am too weak. You were right about me. You were always right. I am just a disappointment. My hand instinctively reached out from behind the tree. Every fiber of my being, every instinct as a father screamed at me to step out into the light. I wanted to walk over there, pull him up from the mud, and wrap my arms around him. I wanted to tell him that I was alive, that I would fix it, that the monsters couldn't hurt him anymore. My foot shifted in the snow, ready to make that move, ready to end the charade and save my boy from his misery. But I froze. I pulled my hand back, because saving him now would be the worst thing I could do. If I stepped out, he would just be the child hiding behind his father's legs again. He would never learn to fight. He would never understand the true weight of his actions. He needed to feel this rock bottom. He needed to sit in the ashes of the life he burned down so he could understand what it takes to build it back up. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. Tears pricked my own eyes, hot and stinging against the cold wind. Staying hidden was harder than facing a firing squad. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But I had to do it. I had to let him break completely, so there was a chance, however small, that he could be put back together right. "I am scared, Dad," Brent whispered into the silence. "I am so scared." "I know, son," I whispered back so quiet, the wind carried it away before it reached him. "I know." I turned around and walked back toward the tree line, leaving my son alone in the dark with his demons. He had to face the night alone. Because tomorrow, when the sun rose, the war would begin. And I needed to know whose side he would finally choose when the bullets started flying. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of bruised steel, casting a cold, flat light over the snow-covered ranch. Down in the bunker, I had been awake for hours, fueling myself on adrenaline and black coffee. On the surveillance monitor, the master bedroom looked like a backstage dressing room for a twisted opera. Mallory sat at the vanity table that used to belong to my wife. But where Martha had kept a simple brush and a Bible, Mallory had spread out an arsenal of beauty products. She was not dressing like a woman about to lose her family home. She was dressing like a queen preparing for her coronation. I watched her apply lipstick with the precision of a surgeon. The shade was a deep, violent crimson. She pressed her lips together and smiled at her reflection, checking her teeth. There was no sadness in that smile. There was no remorse. It was the smile of a predator who thinks the hunt is over and the feast is about to begin. She stood up and slipped into a black designer dress that cost more than my foreman made in 6 months. It was tight, revealing, and completely inappropriate for a foreclosure auction. She did not care. In her mind, she was not going to a funeral for her legacy. She was going to a payday. She moved to the walk-in closet and pulled out a small leather carry-on bag. She had packed it the night before, but she opened it one last time to check the contents. I zoomed the camera in. It was not packed with clothes for Brent or memories of the ranch. It was packed with her passport, a stack of emergency cash, and a travel brochure for Paris. I shook my head in the darkness. She actually believed the fairy tale. She believed that once the gavel fell and the ranch was sold to Garrison Ford, he would hand her a check for $5 million. She thought they would drive to the airport together, leaving Brent and the ruin behind to sip champagne under the Eiffel Tower. The delusion was so thick it was almost suffocating. She had no idea that Ford was not her lover. He was her executioner. She did not know that the man she was dressing up for had already confessed on tape that he planned to leave her with nothing but a criminal record and a bankruptcy filing. She was putting on expensive perfume for a man who viewed her as a disposable loose end. It was pathetic. It was tragic. But it was also necessary. Brent appeared in the doorway of the bedroom. He looked like a walking corpse. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and his eyes were bloodshot from a night of crying at my empty grave. He leaned against the doorframe, watching his wife preen in the mirror. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice hollow. Mallory did not even turn around. She slipped on her oversized sunglasses and grabbed her alligator skin handbag. "Stop looking so depressed, Brent," she snapped. "This is the best day of our lives. By tonight we will be free of this dusty hellhole and your father's ghost." She walked past him without a touch, without a glance, marching down the hallway, with the rhythmic click of her stilettos echoing like a clock counting down to 0. She walked out the front door with her head held high, convinced she was walking toward freedom. She had no idea she was walking straight into the kill box. I put on my own coat, a simple black suit I had kept hidden in the bunker. It was time for me to get dressed, too. The show was about to start, and I had a front row seat. The Centennial Hall was buzzing with the low hum of gossip. It was a drafty old building where we usually held town meetings and harvest dances, but today it felt like an execution chamber. Half the town had squeezed onto the folding metal chairs, their faces grim, whispering behind their hands. They were there to watch the West Empire fall. In the front row, Mallory sat with her back straight, ignoring the stares. She checked her watch every 30 seconds, tapping her manicured nails on her alligator skin purse. She looked bored, as if this was just a tedious layover on her way to paradise. In the back of the room, leaning against the peeling paint of the wall, stood Garrison Ford. He looked relaxed, almost bored. He was checking messages on his phone, confident that his lowball bid would be the only one on the table. He thought he was walking into a candy store to steal a lollipop. He had no idea he was walking into a Shark Tank. I stood in the shadows of the balcony, hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain, watching the scene unfold. I checked my phone. It was 11:55 a.m. Right on time. Outside, the crunch of gravel announced the arrival of the cavalry, but these were not the rusted suspensions of farm trucks. Through the high windows, heads turned to see a convoy of black luxury SUVs pulling into the lot. The doors opened, and the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. A group of 12 people walked through the double doors. They moved with the silent confidence of money. Real money. They were not wearing denim and flannel. They wore Italian wool suits, cashmere coats, and watches that cost as much as a house. The silence in the room was deafening. The locals stared confused. Mallory turned around, her sunglasses slipping down her nose. She didn't recognize a single one of them. But I did. Leading the pack was Julian Thorne, the CEO of a massive energy conglomerate in Texas. Behind him was Sarah Jenkins, a venture capitalist from Seattle, who owed her start to a loan I gave her 20 years ago. There was Mike Ross from the Chicago Commodities Exchange. These were not random strangers. These were my silent partners. These were the men and women I had done business with for decades in the shadows. I had called in every favor. I told them simply that a thief was trying to steal my land, and I needed them to make it expensive. They walked down the center aisle, their polished shoes clicking on the hardwood floor. They didn't look at Mallory. They didn't look at the locals. They took the reserved seats in the second row, pulling out gold pens and auction paddles. I watched Garrison Ford's face. The smug smile vanished. He straightened up, his eyes darting from one suit to another. He recognized Julian Thorne. He knew Sarah Jenkins. He did the math instantly. These people weren't here for a bake sale. They were here to buy. Ford took a step forward, his jaw tight. He realized suddenly that his plan to pick up the ranch for pennies was dead. If he wanted that lithium, he wasn't going to steal it. He was going to have to bleed for it. The air in the room grew thick with tension. The auctioneer stepped up to the podium and banged his gavel. The sound cracked like a gunshot. The hunt was on. Deal! The auctioneer, a man named Higgins, who had sold everything from prize bulls to antique furniture in this town for 40 years, wiped sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. He looked nervous. He adjusted the microphone, the feedback squeal making everyone in the room wince. I watched from the darkness of the balcony, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. This was the moment. The gavel banged against the podium, a sharp wooden crack that silenced the murmurs of the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, Higgins announced, his voice trembling slightly. We are here today for the court-ordered foreclosure auction of the West Ranch estate. This includes the main residence, all outbuildings, livestock, and 5,000 acres of prime grazing land. Hearing my life reduced to a list of assets made my stomach turn. 50 years of sweat, blood, and tears summarized in 2 sentences. Down in the front row, Mallory sat up straighter. She was practically vibrating with greed. She looked over at Garrison Ford, who was leaning against the back wall with his arms crossed. He gave her a subtle nod. He was ready to steal my legacy for pennies. "The bank has set the opening bid at $1 million, Higgins said. "Do I have $1 million?" The room was silent. $1 million was a fortune in this town. Most of the locals just looked at their shoes. They were here to watch the tragedy, not participate in it. Garrison Ford stepped forward from the back wall. He didn't even raise his hand. He just spoke, his voice booming with entitlement. "1 million, Ford said. "And let's wrap this up, Higgins. I have a lunch reservation." Mallory let out a small breath of relief. She thought it was over. She thought Ford would be the only bidder, just as he promised. She was already calculating her cut in her head. Higgins looked around the room, raising his gavel. "I have 1 million from Mr. Ford. Going once? Going twice? 2 million. The voice was calm, deep, and cut through the room like a knife. It came from the second row. Julian Thorne, my old friend from Texas, raised his paddle number 401 without even looking up from his phone. The entire room gasped. Heads snapped toward Julian. Mallory froze, her mouth falling open. She turned around, staring at the stranger in the expensive suit. "Who is that?" she whispered to Brent. Brent didn't answer. He was staring at Julian with wide, terrified eyes. Ford stopped, leaning against the wall. His smug smile vanished instantly. He glared at Julian's back, his eyes narrowing. He had not expected competition. He certainly had not expected a 100% markup on the opening bid. 2 million, Higgins stammered, surprised. "Do I hear 2.5, 3 million? Another voice. This time it was Sarah Jenkins, sitting 2 seats down from Julian. She raised her paddle gracefully. The crowd erupted into whispers. $3 million. For a ranch that was supposedly bankrupt, Ford's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. He walked down the aisle, approaching the front, his hands clenched into fists. He realized suddenly that this was not a formality. This was a war, and he had brought a knife to a gunfight. 4 million, Ford shouted, his voice losing its cool composure. 5 million, Julian countered instantly. I leaned forward against the balcony railing, gripping the velvet curtain. The trap was sprung. Ford was angry now. And an angry man does not think. He reacts. He was about to bleed, and I was going to enjoy every drop. The air in the Centennial Hall had become so thick with tension you could choke on it. The price had climbed past $6 million, then 7. Garrison Ford was no longer leaning against the back wall with a smug grin. He was pacing the center aisle like a caged animal, his face glistening with a sheen of cold sweat. Every time Julian Thorne or Sarah Jenkins raised their paddle with that calm, bored expression, Ford flinched, as if he had been physically struck. He was looking at them with wild, paranoid eyes. I knew exactly what he was thinking. He thought they knew. He thought these out-of-town investors had found out about the $50 million lithium deposit sitting under the south pasture. 7,500,000, Higgins chanted, his voice cracking from the strain. Do I hear? 8 million, Ford shouted, his voice raw. He ripped his tie loose, his breathing heavy. 8,500,000, Sarah Jenkins said softly, not even looking up from her manicure. Ford looked like he was about to have a stroke. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed a number. I could see him shouting into the receiver, saliva flying from his lips. I need liquidity now. Leverage the downtown commercial complex. Put the Aspen condo up. Everything. Just get me the line of credit. I don't care about the interest rate. Just do it. He hung up the phone and turned back to the auctioneer, his eyes bloodshot. He was all in. He was betting his entire life's work, every asset he had stolen or swindled over the last 20 years on this one hand of poker. He was convinced that even at $10 million, he was still stealing the land. He was blinded by the greed of the lithium. He didn't realize he wasn't buying a gold mine. He was buying his own bankruptcy. $9 million. Ford screamed, slamming his hand on the back of a chair. Mallory, sitting in the front row, looked like she was going to faint from ecstasy. She was clutching Brent's arm, her fingernails digging into his suit jacket. $9 million. That was nearly double what she had hoped for. In her mind, she was already walking down the Champs-Élysées, draped in diamonds. She looked back at Ford with a gaze that was almost worshipful. She didn't see a desperate man destroying his financial future. She saw a hero delivering her ticket to paradise. Julian Thorne looked at me up in the balcony. It was a barely perceptible glance, just a shift of his eyes. I gave him a single, slow nod. The trap was full. The rat had taken the cheese. Julian lowered his paddle and placed it on the empty chair next to him. Sarah Jenkins did the same. They folded their arms and sat back. The room went deadly silent. "I have $9 million from Mr. Ford," Higgins announced, scanning the room for any other challengers. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. No one moved. The locals held their breath. Ford stood in the aisle, his chest heaving, looking around wildly. He wiped the sweat from his eyes. He had done it. He had scared them off. A twisted smile began to form on his face, a look of triumphant madness. "Going once," Higgins said, raising the heavy wooden gavel. Mallory let out a squeal of delight that she tried to suppress, but failed. She turned to Brent, her eyes wide and manic. "We are free, Brent," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We are finally free." "Going twice," Higgins continued. I stood up in the darkness of the balcony. My hands were steady. I reached for the brown cowboy hat that I had brought with me, the one Toby had told me not to wear on the day I died. I placed it on my head, pulling the brim low. It felt like putting on armor. I walked toward the stairs. The sound of my boots on the metal steps was drowned out by the pounding of blood in my ears. "Sold to Mr. Garrison Ford for $9 million, Higgins shouted, and he brought the gavel down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. The room erupted. Ford threw his hands in the air, roaring in victory. Mallory jumped up and hugged him, laughing hysterically. They were celebrating. They were high-fiving on the deck of the Titanic, completely unaware that they had just hit the iceberg. I reached the double doors at the back of the hall. I took a deep breath. It is showtime. I pushed the doors open with both hands, letting them slam against the walls with a thunderous crash. The seconds between the words "going twice" and the final strike of the gavel felt like they stretched into an eternity. I watched from the shadows of the balcony, analyzing the faces of the people who had conspired to erase me from the earth. Higgins held the heavy wooden mallet high in the air, a pause for dramatic effect that felt cruel to the locals but like a blessing to my family. In that frozen moment, I saw the true face of greed in high definition. Mallory was not just smiling. She was glowing with a toxic radiance. She leaned her head back slightly, her eyes closing behind those dark, oversized sunglasses, savoring the victory like a fine wine. She was already mentally boarding the plane to Paris, leaving her debts, her husband, and my memory in the rearview mirror. She gripped her alligator purse as if it contained the soul of the ranch itself, her knuckles white with anticipation. Beside her, Brent looked like a man who had just survived a firing squad. He let out a long, shuddering breath, his shoulders sagging with an immense weight. He thought he was safe. He thought the $9 million from Ford would wash away his sins, pay off the gambling debts, and silence the demons that kept him awake at night. He looked at Ford with pathetic gratitude, a puppy looking at its master, completely unaware that the man he was worshipping had planned to strip mine the land and leave it a barren wasteland. He thought he had saved the family. He did not know he had just sold our grave. And then there was Ford, the mastermind. He stood there in the center aisle, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his temple onto his expensive collar. He looked around the room one last time, his eyes wild, daring anyone to challenge him. When no one spoke, a look of pure, unadulterated arrogance washed over him. He believed he was the smartest man in the room. He believed he had outmaneuvered the market, the bank, and the West family. He thought he had won the lottery. Then gravity took over. The gavel came down. The sharp crack echoed off the high ceiling beams like a pistol shot, sealing the deal. Sold, Higgins bellowed, his voice filled with relief that the tension was finally over. To Mr. Garrison, Ford, for the sum of $9 million. The tension in the room broke instantly. Mallory let out a laugh that was too loud, too shrill for the somber setting. She jumped to her feet, ignoring the disgusted stares of the townspeople around her. She threw her arms around Brent, not out of affection, but out of hysteria. "We did it!" She screamed, her voice carrying all the way up to the balcony where I stood. "We are rich, Brent. It is over. We are finally free." Ford clapped his hands together, a thunderous sound of self-congratulation. He shook hands with his lawyer, beaming like a king who had just conquered a new kingdom. They began to gather their papers, ready to sign the deed and claim their prize. They were drunk on their own success. They were so loud, so consumed by their celebration, that they did not notice the silence that had fallen over the back of the room. They did not hear the heavy thud of boots on the floorboards. They were busy toasting to a future that had already been canceled. I adjusted my brown hat, took a deep breath, and prepared to ruin their party. The double doors at the back of the hall did not just open. They slammed against the oak-paneled walls with a violence that shook the dust from the rafters. The sound cut through the cheers and the laughter like a guillotine blade. In an instant, the room went from a roar of celebration to a silence so absolute you could hear a heartbeat. Heads snapped around. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the source of the noise. The bright midday sun poured in from the street behind me, turning the entrance into a blinding rectangle of white light. I stood in the center of that light, a tall, imposing silhouette against the glare. I did not move. I let them look. I let them squint against the sun, trying to make out the figure standing in the doorway. Then I took a step. The sound of my heavy work boot hitting the old pine floorboards echoed through the cavernous hall like a hammer strike. I took another. The rhythm was slow, deliberate, and heavy. It was the walk of a man who owns the ground he steps on. As I moved forward, stepping out of the blinding backlight and into the dim, fluorescent glow of the room, the details began to emerge. First, the black suit, crisp and sharp. Then the silver belt buckle, the one I won at the rodeo in '74. And finally, the hat. It was not just any hat. It was the brown Stetson. The one with the sweat stain on the brim and the turkey feather tucked into the band. The hat that every person in this town knew better than their own reflection. The hat that sat on my coffin just 3 days ago. I heard a gasp ripple through the crowd like a wave. It started in the back rows, low and terrified, and spread forward. "It is him," someone whispered. "It is a ghost." Another voice trembled. I kept walking. I did not look at the crowd. My eyes were locked on the front row. I saw Mallory turn around, her smile frozen on her face slowly crumbling into a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She gripped the back of her chair so hard her nails snapped. Beside her, Brent went white, not pale. White, like the blood had been drained from his body in a single second. He slumped in his seat, his eyes bulging, looking at me as if he were seeing the devil himself come to collect a debt. And Garrison Ford, the man who thought he had just bought my kingdom. He was still standing in the aisle, his hands raised in victory, but his arms slowly lowered as I approached. The arrogance drained out of him, replaced by a confusion that was rapidly turning into panic. He blinked, rubbing his eyes, sure that this was a hallucination brought on by stress. But the sound of my boots was real. The dust I kicked up was real. and the rage radiating off me was very, very real. I walked down the center aisle, the crowd parting for me like the Red Sea. I was no longer a memory. I was the judgment day they never saw coming. The silence held for one heartbeat, then two, before shattering like a glass window in a hurricane. It started with a woman in the back row letting out a strangled sob, but it was Mallory who turned the room into a madhouse. She scrambled backward, her high heels catching on the carpet, knocking over her chair with a loud clatter. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. "It is a ghost," she shrieked, her voice cracking so high it hurt the ears. "He is dead. I saw him die. Get him out of here. Somebody, get him out!" She was clawing at the air, looking around for someone, anyone to save her from the nightmare walking down the aisle. But no one moved. The security guards by the door were frozen, their hands hovering over their belts, staring at me with mouths agape. They knew me. They knew Clint West. And seeing a dead man walking with a determined stride was enough to paralyze even the toughest among them. Then there was Brent. My son did not scream. He did not run. He simply ceased to function. As I locked eyes with him, the color drained from his face until he looked like a wax figure. His legs gave out beneath him. He slid off his chair, crashing to the floor in a heap of expensive fabric and shame. He scrambled backward on his hands and knees, trying to put distance between us, knocking into the legs of the people behind him. He looked like a child waking up from a bad dream only to realize the monster was real and standing 5 feet away. "Dad," he wheezed, the word barely escaping his throat. "No. No, it can't be." The room erupted into chaos. People were standing up, craning their necks, whispering frantically to one another. "Is that really him? I thought he burned in the crash. Look at the hat. It is really him." The low roar of hundreds of voices filled the hall, a mix of fear and excitement. Garrison Ford, however, was not scared. He was furious. He stepped into the aisle, blocking my path, his face purple with rage. "Who the hell is this?" Ford bellowed, turning to the auctioneer. "Higgins, get this imposter out of here. We have a closed sale. I bought this property." "Get out of my way, Ford," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. My voice was low, rough like gravel, and it cut through the noise instantly. Ford faltered. He recognized the voice. He looked into my eyes, and for the first time I saw the doubt creep in. He looked at the scar above my eyebrow, the one I got from a barbed wire fence in '82. He looked at the way I stood, feet shoulder-width apart, hands loose at my sides. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This was no imposter. This was the man he thought he had killed. Mallory was still screaming, hysterical, now pulling at her hair. "He is a demon. He is here to drag us to hell." I stopped walking. I stood right in the center of the chaos, the eye of the storm. I looked at the woman who had poisoned my family and the son who had let her. I adjusted the brim of my hat slowly. "You are right about one thing, Mallory," I said, my voice carrying to the rafters. "I am here to drag you somewhere. But it ain't hell. It is prison." I brushed past Garrison Ford as if he were nothing more than a cobweb in a doorway. He tried to stammer a protest, reaching out to grab my arm, but I didn't even break stride. I just kept moving, my eyes fixed on the raised platform at the front of the hall. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, a familiar sound that I had heard 1,000 times in this building, but today it sounded like the ticking of a bomb. I reached the top of the stage and walked behind the heavy oak podium. Higgins, the auctioneer, was shaking so badly he dropped his pen. He looked at me with wide, watery eyes, stumbling back until he hit the wall. I didn't say a word to him. I just reached out and took the gavel from his trembling hand. I looked out at the sea of faces. The room was frozen in a tableau of shock. The townspeople, the wealthy investors, the vultures, and the victims were all staring at me in stunned silence. I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. I could hear the ragged breathing of my son on the floor. I reached up and gripped the brim of my Stetson. The leather felt warm and rough against my fingertips. I took it off slowly, revealing my face fully to the harsh fluorescent lights. My hair was a little longer, my face a little thinner from the weeks of living on canned beans in the dark, but the eyes were the same. The steel was still there. I raised the hat and brought it down on the auctioneer's table with a force that shook the microphone. Bam! The sound rang out like a gunshot, making half the front row flinch. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight hitting the podium. I leaned into the microphone, my hands gripping the edges of the wood until my knuckles turned white. "I have a heavy objection to these proceedings," I said, my voice rolling through the hall like thunder. "You cannot foreclose on a man's life while he is still standing here to defend it. You cannot sell a man's legacy while he is still breathing the air on his own land." I looked directly at the court clerk sitting at the side table, a young woman who looked like she was about to faint. "You can put your stamp away, darling, and you can tear up that deed." I shifted my gaze to Garrison Ford, who was standing in the aisle, his face a mask of purple rage and confusion. "And you, Mr. Ford, you can take your $9 million and get off my property. This auction is officially canceled." Why, someone from the back shouted, their voice trembling with awe. Because I answered, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "The owner is not dead. I am Clinton West. I built this town. I built this ranch. And I will be damned if I let a couple of greedy children and a crooked developer take it away from me while my heart is still beating. The king has returned, and court is now in session. I did not come back from the grave with empty hands. Words are wind, and in a town like this, rumors can be twisted until the truth looks like a lie. But a camera does not forget, and a microphone does not forgive. I reached into the inside pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out a small black remote. I pointed it toward the large projection screen that had been set up behind the podium, originally intended to show pretty pictures of my pastures to potential bidders. Now it was going to show them the ugly soul of the people trying to sell them. "Watch closely," I said, my voice echoing in the stunned silence. The screen flickered to life. The audio crackled through the hall's speakers, loud and distorted, but every word was crystal clear. It was the footage from my living room, time-stamped 3 days ago. Mallory's face filled the wall, twisted in that familiar rage. The town watched breathless as she slapped Brent. Then came the sentence that sucked the air right out of the room. "You are the one who crawled under his truck." Mallory's voice shrieked, amplified so that it rattled the windows. "You are the one who cut the brake lines with your own hands while I kept watch." "We killed him, Brent." A collective gasp swept through the audience like a physical wind. I saw the sheriff, old Jim Miller, who was standing by the exit, straighten up and drop his hand to his holster. People in the back rows stood up to get a better look, hands covering their mouths. Mallory, still on the floor near the front, let out a wail of denial, but the video kept playing. It cut to a new scene. The timestamps changed. Now it was the interior of a luxury hotel room. The image was grainy, but there was no mistaking the two figures tangled together on the velvet sofa. It was Mallory and Garrison Ford. The scandal of the affair alone would have been enough to set this conservative town on fire, but it was the words that followed that burned the house down. On the giant screen, Ford was laughing, a cigar in his hand. "I am going to strip mine that whole valley," he said, his digital voice dripping with arrogance. "The old man is dead, and his idiot kids are handing me a $50 million lithium deposit for pennies." The crowd turned on them instantly. The shock turned to fury. I watched the faces of the investors, Julian and Sarah, shaking their heads in disgust. But the most devastating reaction did not come from the townspeople. It came from the third row. Garrison Ford stood frozen in the aisle, his face pale as ash. He was not looking at me. He was not looking at the screen. He was looking at a woman sitting quietly in the reserved section. It was Elizabeth Ford, his wife of 20 years, the daughter of the state senator, the woman whose family money had built his entire career. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the screen where her husband was rolling around with another woman. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply stood up, smoothed her skirt with dignified precision, and looked at Ford with eyes that were colder than any grave I had ever slept in. She turned her back on him and walked toward the exit, the crowd parting for her in sympathetic silence. Ford reached out a hand, his mouth opening to say her name, but no sound came out. He knew it was over. He had lost the deal. He had lost his reputation. And in front of the entire town, he had just lost his life. I looked down at him from the podium and spoke into the microphone one last time. The defense rests. Sheriff, I believe you have some work to do. The sheriff was moving toward the aisle, handcuffs rattling at his belt, ready to take custody of the wreckage that was my family. But I raised a hand, stopping him in his tracks. I was not finished. The legal destruction was complete, but the moral reckoning was just beginning. I looked down at the floor where Brent was kneeling. He was weeping, a broken man, muttering apologies that meant nothing. He looked up at me, his eyes searching for a shred of the father he thought he knew, hoping that perhaps under the anger there was still a bond of blood that could save him. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket one last time. I did not pull out a weapon or a remote control. I pulled out an envelope. It was old, the paper yellowed and brittle with age, sealed with a wax stamp that had cracked decades ago. I held it up so the light caught the faded writing on the front. "Do you know what this is, Brent?" I asked, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent hall. Brent shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "This is a paternity test from 1980, I said. I opened the envelope, the sound of tearing paper echoing like a whisper. A murmur went through the crowd. I pulled out the document. It was typed on a typewriter, the ink faint. I looked at the paper, then I looked at the man I had raised. "You always said you deserved the ranch because it was your birthright. You said the West blood ran in your veins. You justified your greed, your laziness, and even your attempt to murder me by telling yourself that you were simply claiming what was genetically yours." I let the paper drift from my hand. It fluttered down through the air, landing softly on the floor, right in front of his knees. "You are wrong," I said, cold and hard. "Martha made a mistake one summer. A mistake with a man from the city who didn't care about her or this land. When you were born, I knew. I knew the moment I looked into your eyes that you weren't mine." Brent gasped, looking at the paper as if it were a burning coal. He couldn't breathe. The realization was crushing him. "I could have sent you away." I continued, my voice trembling with the memory of that pain. "I could have divorced your mother. I could have left you with nothing. But I didn't. I made a choice. I chose to be your father. I chose to give you my name. I chose to teach you how to ride a horse, how to throw a lasso, and how to be a man. I sat by your bed when you had pneumonia. I paid for your college when you failed out. I covered your debts. I loved you, Brent. I loved you more than I loved myself because I thought that nurture was stronger than nature." I stepped down from the podium, walking until I was standing right over him. He looked small. He looked like a stranger. "I gave you a life you never should have had. I gave you a name that opened every door in this state. And how did you repay me? You didn't just fail me. You didn't just steal from me. You crawled under my truck in the middle of the night and cut the brake lines. You looked at the man who saved you from being a bastard with nothing, and you decided he was worth more dead than alive." I leaned down, whispering so only he could hear the final verdict. "I fed you with love for 40 years, and you paid me back with a death sentence. You aren't my son, Brent. You never were, and now you are nobody. Sheriff, take him away." The sound of steel ratcheting against steel is a noise you never forget. It cuts through the air sharper than a knife. Sheriff Jim Miller, a man I had known since we were boys stealing apples from the orchard, stepped forward. He did not look happy about what he had to do. His face was grim, etched with the lines of a man who had seen too much darkness in a small town. He walked up to Mallory first. She was still on the floor. Her expensive dress ruined her mascara running in black streaks down her face like war paint. When Jim reached for her wrist, she screamed. "Get your hands off me!" she shrieked, kicking out at him. "Do you know who I am? I am a West. You cannot touch me. It was him. It was Brent. He did it all. I just watched." Jim did not say a word. He simply spun her around with a practiced motion and snapped the cuffs onto her wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," he recited, his voice flat and tired. "I suggest you use it, Mrs. West, although I think the jury has seen enough of your home movies to make up their minds." He hauled her to her feet. She was thrashing like a wild animal, caught in a snare, spitting venom at anyone who looked at her. The townspeople turned their backs on her as she passed a wall of rejection that hurt her more than the handcuffs ever could. Then Jim turned to Brent. My son was still kneeling, staring at the paternity test that lay on the floorboards. He looked up at the sheriff, then over at me. There was no fight left in him. He slowly held out his hands, wrists together, in a gesture of absolute surrender. He did not say a word as the metal clicked shut. He looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with a sorrow that was 40 years too late. I nodded at him, a single solemn chin lift. "Goodbye, Brent." But we were not done. Garrison Ford was trying to slip away through the side exit, hoping the chaos would cover his escape. He almost made it to the door before a shadow blocked his path. It was Holloway, my attorney. He looked like a small, harmless man in his spectacles, but today he was holding a stack of files that weighed as much as a tombstone. "Going somewhere, Mr. Ford?" Holloway asked, his voice polite but icy. "Get out of my way," Ford snarled, straightening his tie. "This is a domestic dispute. It has nothing to do with me. I am leaving." "I am afraid that is not possible," Holloway said, signaling to two deputies waiting by the door. "I have just filed a formal complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission and the district attorney. Based on the evidence Mr. West provided, you are under arrest for commercial fraud, insider trading, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny." Ford laughed, but it sounded desperate. "You have nothing. Just the ramblings of a senile old man." "Actually," Holloway smiled, tapping the file, "we have the wire transfers where you paid the mechanic to cut the brakes. We have the emails where you discussed the lithium deposits you failed to disclose to the seller. And we have your confession on tape. You are not going to a country club prison, Mr. Ford. You are going to a federal penitentiary." The deputies grabbed Ford by the arms. For the first time, the arrogance shattered completely. He looked at me, his eyes wide with the realization that he was not the hunter, but the prey. I watched from the podium as the three of them were marched out of the hall, out into the cold snow, leaving behind the warmth they had tried to steal. The heavy double doors swung shut behind them with a final resounding thud. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was clean. The rot had been cut out. The ranch was safe. And for the first time in a long time, I could finally breathe. The winter snow had finally melted, revealing the rich, dark earth of the valley beneath. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the silence that had suffocated the West Ranch was replaced by the beautiful symphony of life. It was a noise I had missed more than I realized. The sound of tractors roaring to life in the pre-dawn light. The bellowing of cattle moving toward the fresh spring grass. The rhythmic hammering of fence posts being repaired. It was the sound of a heart starting to beat again after a long, cold cardiac arrest. I stood on the front porch, a mug of hot coffee in my hand, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was a new day in every sense of the word. I had spent the last week on the phone making the calls that needed to be made. I did not have a secretary do it. I did it myself. I called every single ranch hand, stable boy, and cook that Mallory had fired in her blind greed. I asked them to come home. And they did. A convoy of rusted pickup trucks was rolling up the driveway right now. Diego was the first one out of his truck. He looked hesitant, unsure if the nightmare was truly over. I walked down the steps to meet him. I did not act like the boss. I acted like a man who owed a debt. I shook his hand, and I held it tight. I told him that his wages were doubled effective immediately. I told him that as long as I drew breath, he would never be treated like garbage again. I saw the tears well up in the old man's eyes, and that was enough for me. The soul of the ranch was back. But a kingdom needs a king, and I knew my time on the throne was coming to an end. I was tired. The war with my family had taken a toll that no amount of sleep could fix. I needed to look to the future. I turned and walked back into the house. We had stripped out the mirrors and the yoga mats from the study. My old oak desk was back where it belonged, and the picture of Martha was back on the shelf watching over us. Toby was waiting for me inside. He looked different than the boy who used to sneak down to the bunker. He stood taller. His shoulders were broader. The weeks of sleeping in the barn and fighting for what was right had forged him into steel. He was not just a kid anymore. He was a West. I walked behind the desk and picked up a thick stack of papers. I did not make a speech. I just slid them across the mahogany surface toward him. Toby looked at the cover page. His eyes went wide. Executive Director of Operations. He read aloud, his voice shaking slightly. Grandpa, are you sure? This is everything. The accounts, the land deeds, the livestock management. I am not sure, Toby, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I am certain. You were the only one who didn't care about the money. You were the only one who cared about the people and the animals. That makes you the only one qualified to lead them. I pulled a pen from my pocket and set it down next to the contract. It is a big job, son. It is early mornings and late nights. But it is yours. Toby picked up the pen. He didn't hesitate. He signed his name with a steady hand. I watched him swelling with a pride that almost made my chest burst. The rot was gone. The parasites were in a cell where they belonged, and the ranch was in the hands of someone who actually loved it. I took a sip of my coffee. The view from the porch was going to be just fine from now on. I was officially retired. The sun was beginning to dip below the western ridge, painting the sky in streaks of violet and burnt orange. It was the kind of sunset Martha used to love, the kind that made you stop whatever you were doing, just to watch the day burn itself out. I stood in the middle of my study, the silence of the room feeling comfortable now, not oppressive. The mirrors were gone. The gym equipment was in the trash. The room smelled like leather and old paper again, just as it should. In my hands, I held the brown Stetson. It was battered and worn. The brim was stained with sweat and rain, and there was a permanent crease on the left side where I always grabbed it. This hat had been with me through blizzards and droughts. It had sat on my head while I built this empire, and it had sat on my coffin when I watched my world fall apart. It was more than just a piece of felt. It was a symbol of the war I had just fought. It was the helmet of a soldier who had to die to save his family. But the war was over now. The enemies were gone, and a soldier does not wear his armor in peacetime. I walked over to the limestone fireplace. Above the mantel, right next to the portrait of Martha, was a sturdy iron hook. I reached up and placed the brown hat on it. It settled there, looking heavy, looking tired. I ran a finger along the brim one last time, whispering a silent goodbye to the man I had to become to survive the last month. That angry, vengeful ghost could rest now. He had done his job. The door to the study opened with a soft click. I turned to see Toby standing there. He was holding a large square box wrapped in simple brown paper. He looked at the hat on the wall, then at me, a knowing smile touching his lips. I thought it was time for a change, Grandpa, Toby said, his voice warm. You scared half the town to death in that old thing. We need people to know that the ghost is gone and the boss is back. He handed me the box. I untied the string and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of tissue paper, was a brand new Stetson. It was pure, pristine white. It was the kind of hat a man wears to church or to a wedding, or to watch his grandson run the ranch he built. It was a hat for the future, not the past. I lifted it out, feeling the stiffness of the new felt. I placed it on my head and looked in the reflection of the window. It looked bright. It looked like peace. Fits you perfect, Toby said. I clapped him on the shoulder. It feels light, son. It feels real light. I turned back to the window, looking out over the thousands of acres that were finally safe. The cattle were grazing. The lights were coming on in the bunkhouse. The world was turning right side up again. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool evening air, and I spoke not to Toby, but to anyone out there who might be listening to the wind. You know, life has a funny way of showing you what matters. We spend so much time looking at the surface of things. We look at the fancy cars, the expensive suits, and the polite smiles at dinner parties. We think that is what is real. But it is all just paint. Don't believe what you see with your eyes, because eyes can be tricked by a little bit of glitter and a lot of lies. Believe in the things you feel. Believe in the cold chill that runs down your spine when a liar shakes your hand. Believe in the warmth of the dog that sits by your feet when you have nothing left. And most of all, believe in the people who dare to tell you the truth, even when it is ugly and even when it breaks your heart. Because the people who lie to you are trying to get something from you, but the people who tell you the truth are trying to save you. So keep your eyes open. Keep your powder dry. Love your family, but make sure you know who your family really is. And remember one last thing for your own sake. You can push a good man, you can cheat him, and you can even try to bury him. But do not ever, under any circumstances, make the mistake of angering a man in a brown cowboy hat. The saga of the West Ranch teaches us that true wealth is never measured in acres of land or the balance of a bank account. It is measured in loyalty and the quiet strength of character. We saw how greed can rot a family from the inside out, turning blood relatives into strangers and strangers into allies. Clint West thought he was building a legacy with money, but he realized that his true legacy was the values he passed down to his grandson. It reminds us to look past the smiling faces and expensive suits to see the true heart of the people around us. Trust is a currency more valuable than gold, so be careful where you spend it, and never underestimate the power of standing up for what is right, even when you have to stand alone. If this story of justice and redemption kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and share it with your friends, and tell us in the comments if you would have forgiven Brent or if he got exactly what he deserved.